the damage gets a level deeper when we start sinking into attribution. So, and we see this a lot in divorcing clients, and it's obviously not helpful in marriage, and it's also not helpful when you're trying to negotiate divorce. So we're going to kind of dive in and explain to you what attributions are and how you can hopefully avoid them and or stop making attribution.
We all have our self-image, and we also all have our opinions about the other person. I have this joke about Tammy that I see her as a control enthusiast, and that's a funny way of saying control freak, and
which I am.
Well, I know, but the thing is, that's not the sum total of who Tammy is. But when you're fighting, and I say stop controlling me, you always control me.
Them's fighting words.
Those are fighting words. That's an attribution. That says this defines who you are as a person, and you're inherently wicked and evil, and should stop being that way. And it's what it causes. It causes an extreme defensive reaction, even more so than the rebuttals, because when somebody says that's not what happened, that's one thing. You may apply an attribution that you're either a liar or you're forgetful or whatever, but an attribution goes to the core of your self-image. We don't. When we think about ourselves, we prefer not to think of our faults and we prefer to think of ourselves as basically virtuous, and that is the reason, frankly, why there's so much misunderstanding. That people don't understand that they're not always as virtuous as they think they are.
Right.
But when you attack somebody's virtue, you're attacking them at the core of their belief in who they are. And that causes extreme defensiveness, and often the best defense is a good offense.
Right.
So they'll think of the most hurtful thing they can say to you that hurts your self-esteem.
Right.
When you're having a conversation with your ex and you're trying to solve a problem, and you start out with the what happened conversation, which is the lowest level of conflict. And you start to dispute each other's version of the facts. So you get argumentative.
Which is the defensiveness we talked about in the last episode.
Right. And then in the mid-level, there's kind of this level where we vent our feelings, where we say, well, F you, maybe that's above. But the highest level on the pyramid of conflict is the attribution. Well, short of physical violence, is the attribution, is finding that, and as married people, we all know where that is. Finding that core of that person's self-belief and attacking that. And that's going to erupt in violence almost every time. So we have to be careful not to do that in our communication.
Right. And this takes practice.
Yes.
And this takes a lot of awareness. And here's the thing, even if this is one of those areas that you have to do it, even if the other person isn't doing it.
Yeah.
You still need to do it, because it only takes one person to change the dynamic. And, one of the things that I say to my kids a lot in their relationships is, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Right.
You have to decide.
Right.
You have to decide if upping the ante and kind of going to that attribution level and setting that bomb off on that person's character, because those are damaging comments that that don't just repair after the argument's over. If we're having a conversation about what happened, that's probably going to repair after the conversation's over.
Right. As soon as you admit you're wrong, yes, it will.
Even the defensiveness, to an extent, can repair once the conversation's over. But when you go to an attribution level, what happens is your spouse hears you saying that over and over and over again. They're replaying it in their mind because it hits them at such a core level, and it's so upsetting to our self-identity that because it's the thing we already doubt about ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
You know, the thing we're already struggling with. Well, I'm already struggling with trying to lose weight and trying to do these things, and now he's called me fat. And so that's going to replay in my mind over and over and over. And what's the outcome of that going to be? The outcome of that is that I'm going to feel not as relaxed around him, particularly probably in an intimate setting, or I'm going to be more... I won't want to sit down and have a meal with him because I'll just have this fear that he's thinking, about my weight the whole time.
There are other things you won't do.
Well, I just said it makes it hard to be comfortable, especially like in intimacy or different things. And it depends on what the issues you're talking about. Like if we're talking about Thomas's laziness, for example, and I say that, then what he hears in his head over and over is, oh, she's right. You're lazy, just like your dad always told you. Well, what the outcome of that is and how that would impact me, because sometimes we think that we just say something and we don't care if we hurt the other person, but we don't think about how that would hurt themselves. What that would do to Thomas is, this job that he does, being an attorney for divorcing people, is already a taxing job. And so now I'm hitting his self-esteem, which makes it harder for him to do his job, do it well, do it with confidence.
And you're removing my defenses.
I'm undermining it, which also hurts your ability to earn, which hurts me. And so there's this whole, if you really start pulling into this and looking at the whole cycle, this attribution, I know in a certain way we're talking about it, it seems simple, but this really goes very, very deep into the heartbeat of the relationship.
In the context of divorcing people where you have to communicate, we see a lot of this in the text messaging and in the talking parents and all the other things. And one very good reason not to do this is because you want to make a record that you're being nice. You want to let them be the one that is argumentative and makes attributions and attacks your character and all that other stuff, because that's a good way to start wearing the black hat in the case.
Is by making attributions.
And being argumentative and writing paragraphs about what a lousy person the other is.
Yeah, and if the other person's doing that and you cannot do it, that's going to help you in court.
A very common attribution in these circles is accusations of mental illness, and we see this all the time in co-parenting relationships where that person will say, "Oh, he's a narcissist," and what really, if you stop and think about it, what worse thing could you say about a person than that they're a narcissist, that they're completely obsessed with their own interest, they're completely self-centered? Sometimes they are. Well, yeah, but it doesn't help. You don't score any points by pointing it out.
Agreed.
All it does is, there's a saying in one of our high conflict books that says, "Don't diss the narcissist," because you're not going to like the reaction you get. You're not going to like that.
Yeah. And if you are dealing with a narcissist, let me just tell you, go onto our Facebook page, My Family Law Office, and like the page and follow the page, because I am on the verge, or it may already be by the time this releases, but on the verge of launching a Divorcing a Narcissist group coaching program. And so, we're not saying that the person isn't a narcissist. If you think they are, they may very well be. But what Thomas is saying is throwing that accusation out and saying, well, the problem is you're just a narcissist, is not going to help you. And actually, if the person is a narcissist, that's probably the worst thing that you could do, because it makes them even more severe. And there are ways of dealing with their behavior, but that's not it. I think a lot of times, particularly around co-parenting, that people do have the concept that diagnosis is going to get them some leverage with the court. And here's the thing, like Thomas said, we all have something. People struggle with depression and anxiety, or or bipolar, or narcissism, or ADD, or whatever it is. Like we all, I think any of us that went in would probably come out with some kind of diagnosis for something.
Right.
And the court doesn't see that as, oh, the person's bipolar, they can't parent. The court doesn't see it that way, particularly if you have somebody who is on their meds, being treated, doing what they're supposed to do. The presumption is going to be that they're an adequate parent. And here's the thing. If this person's been a narcissist your entire marriage and you suddenly don't think they should be with the kids, the question's going to be, well, why did you stay in the marriage and allow them to be a parent with the kids for 10 years, but now suddenly because you're going through a divorce, they're not adequate?
On a practical level, when you are in a co-parenting relationship and you're getting a divorce, you're not going to have the same kind of relationship that you had when you were married.
Right.
And so really one of the things we advise is that you just completely cut out all the emotional statements.
Right.
So when we coach people, we try to weed those out and just have the facts. Johnny was at the pediatrician last week and they gave him an inhaler. He will need to keep that with him in case he has respiratory distress.
Right.
Just make sure. But what everybody says is, I'm not giving you the inhaler because you've been so irresponsible and you just don't pay attention to anything. And so you're going to have to get your own, and, that's fighting words.
Yeah.
So we try to take those emotional statements out and just be factual.
One of the things that you have to do is say to yourself, before you pop off at the mouth, do you want to feel good right now in this moment? Or do you actually want to get through this process as quickly and easily as possible? And that involves swallowing some of your pride. It really does.
If you're on the receiving end of the attribution, take a deep breath. Count to 10. Do whatever you can to not respond in kind.
Right.
Because, if you're below the line, it's your responsibility to de-escalate.
Right.
And to have communication, you can't escalate because you'll never get to a solution that way.
Right. And that space is what that deep breath, that 10 seconds, that whatever it is, it gives you time to form your response to what was said, as opposed to just having an immediate reaction. There's a difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is something I let someone else draw me into.
Right.
A response is when I stop and think and consider and decide how I want to respond to this issue.
To sum up, you really want to avoid in any co-parenting communication or any communication that's designed to help you resolve the case, you want to avoid those statements that are statements about that person as who they are as a person, their character.
And if you are still married and have any hope of saving your marriage and you're doing this, please stop.
Yeah, don't do that.
A long way, yeah.
Yeah, and if you are on the other end of that kind of attribution, it's probably not a good idea to respond in kind.
Right, don't react to it. Respond to the substance of the question and not to the attack.
We'll grow in number, fueled by them to see the horizon, turn us to thousands.